Dan Gwynn with FrancisSchaefferStudies.org, and I'm here with Dick Keyes, and I'm just going to talk with him a little bit about L'Abri and about Francis Schaeffer, and also about his work. Nick, thank you for taking the time.
Good to be here.
I think the first thing is I just want to hear a little bit about your story, about how you came to L'Abri and how things got started for you.
The year after I finished college, I finished college, was not a Christian at all, was sort of fed up with learning. I thought, I'm just not bright enough to hold this together. I'd been given the model, you're here for the big picture, you don't trade, this is a trade school to learn a skill, and as you graduate, you're here for the big picture. And then I ended up studying with intensive specialists who would burrow very deeply into very narrow little topics, and I couldn't connect them, and I couldn't figure out what it all meant, and I could pass exams and then forget everything, pass the next exam, forget it. I thought, this is not where it's at. And so packed all my books up when I graduated and sold them all. Then, this was 1964, Vietnam was on the rise, and I would have been drafted in a matter of months. At that, I was not at all sure about what I thought about Vietnam. And at that point, you could get a draft deferment. I wasn't a conscientious objector, I wasn't a pacifist, but you could get a draft deferment, postponing it, as long as you were involved in some sort of study. Now, I heard you could study at a French university for about $15 for a year, tuition, and for about $9, get a French university restaurant meal ticket. And so you could really live on the cheap. And my roommate and I went over there to southern France, decided to spend a year over there, partly to just think to sort of get some space, so on. And someone just before we left had given me the address of L'Abri, and I'd met Christians for the first time just in that year. People who would say, I'm a Christian, and have it mean something to them. I'd never been exposed to anything evangelical at all up until that time. And someone gave me the address of L'Abri and said, there's a really interesting guy there, and his wife is a very good cook, and it's cheap. And I thought, well, that's not bad. And so my roommate and I went up just before the term started, our academic term in France started, and spent about a week there. And it was pretty strange to me because I had very, very little contact with real biblical faith, and so it was a bit of a shock. And I was on the one hand very drawn to it because I could hear in Dr. Schaeffer someone who was integrating all the ideas that had been separate little bits and pieces for me in my whole experience in college. In art, in philosophy, in political theory, in history, all these things were just little bits and pieces spread around. He was tying them all together, and he was showing how changes in the history of philosophy really made changes in the history of art, changes in the history of theology, philosophy back again, and literature. And I thought, whoa, this actually makes learning exciting. This makes learning something that might even be useful, not just exciting, but useful and worth getting into. And I had a sort of an intellectual birth then that I never had in my 4 years in college. I came alive and I began to love learning, and I've never really recovered from that. So it's amazing. But I was really freaked out by the Bible, by needing to treat God as Lord, by that being a very personal and deep thing and meaning your whole life. That I just felt, no, that's very scary. And but I remember with my roommate, Dr. Schaeffer took us on a walk on his day off, which he didn't usually do. But we wanted to walk with him. Left about 9 in the morning, and went up in the mountains. It was in the autumn, and he got lost. He made the wrong turn in a valley. He'd been walking there all his life, but he made a wrong turn. And we didn't get back till we arrived in the town down at the bottom of the valley at midnight, having wandered through snow and through under the Swiss artillery firing and stuff like this. And we finally and then he had someone come and pick us up at midnight. But we talked the whole time, and with me and my roommate and back and forth. And it wasn't just that day, but it was the whole experience that sent me away that time with a sense, okay, you're not a Christian, but you want to be an honest person. You don't want to just cheat and just pull values and purposes and things out of the sky that aren't really there. Mm-hmm. And so he says you can not think, you can not ask any questions, and you're free to be a cabbage. You can be a cabbage if you want. And or you can actually really pursue honesty and think through these questions. And the thing that he said that gave me encouragement, he said, if more people were really honest, there would be many more Christians around. If people were really critical in their thinking, more people were really critical, there'd be many more Christians. And that somehow was an encouragement to me, because I'd always grown up with this idea that if you're religious or if you're Christian, it's only because you're uncritical. It's only because you don't let loose your critical abilities on anything. And you just sort of push those things aside because they're sort of nasty or cynical or unhelpful or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I emerged from that time, and I spent the rest of that year, sometime in France there, but we got fed up with the university, went to Paris most of the winter, traveled around, trying to figure out, is this guy right? Or is he whacked? Is he a crackpot or something? Is he just quicker on his feet than I am? Or is he actually onto something? And so I had to figure that out. And for me, and he helped me, sort of encouraged me to just, well, what else is a viable option for you? You need to look at that critically. You need to look at the Christian faith critically. And so as I thought, it was looking at the field of what I'd been exposed to. A secular existentialism and /humanism would be one option. A very liberal form of the Christian faith that didn't need to take the Bible seriously would be another option. And the main other option was the East, was Hinduism, Buddhism, which is very much current. I've been exposed to friends and so on in believing things from that tradition. And so I studied harder that year on my own than I ever had in college, and I had in university. Buying books, reading them, sending them home, buying books, reading them, sending them home, and talking to people and trying to figure out, is this really true? And I emerged from the year, went back a few times, 2 more times to L'Abri with all my questions and arguments. I went back to France, read the whole Bible in 3 days because I didn't know it. I didn't know what was in it. I'd never read it, and I don't like surprises. I want to know what's in these. If I'm asked to believe something, I don't want to not know what I'm believing in. So I don't recommend that. But anyway, I did that.
You did.
So, for whatever it's worth.
It sounds like you were really intensely driven at that point.
Yeah. Well, I was very moved by that experience, because I know I've got to do something with this. This is really, and I was drawn to the whole way they were living, and to a really sort of a high level of integrity of taking what they believe seriously, and that was hard to miss. And so I was at the right point, I think. And so I came back 2 or 3 more times, and by the final end, about a year later, I really said, I actually believe this. I think this is really true. And so that was, but a lot of it was with him, a lot of it was with his patience, coming up with all of my objections and difficulties and very patiently working them through. Just being there in L'Abri, hearing a lot of other people's issues. What happens in L'Abri is you bring your issues, but you also hear everybody else's issues too, some of which you've never dreamed of and never heard of and don't understand. But hey, these are real people, so you get an expanded view of issues that matter in a way that I found very helpful. But I really said, this is really true by the end, and I want to live this way. So they went back, made my peace with the military, and so on. But then to be quick through the rest of it, was in the Army, did a 6-month deal, worked in business for a while, but felt this tremendous need to learn, because I had no background in this. I hadn't read the Bible at all until that year, or studied anything Christian. And so I just felt this burning need to study. So I decided to go to seminary. I thought I could take a year at seminary and get it out of my system, and then I'd be all right. that failed. I went and then had to do a full 4 years or 3.5 years because all these issues opened up in front of me.
And was this at Covenant?
This was at Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia.
Oh, Westminster.
Yeah. Because I've been very interested in apologetics. My whole experience has been with apologetics on myself. And so I was very concerned there, and they had a special emphasis on that there, which was a challenge to me. But then decided that through the time there that though I'd thought of trying to work with L'Abri directly, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I was involved with a lot of people doing different things and forever sending young people to Switzerland to get their heads squared away. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why should we send people to Switzerland to get their heads together? This needs to start happening in the church. The things that we most value at L'Abri need to happen all over the place. Silly to have one place across the ocean.
Yeah.
So I thought, no, I'll become a pastor of a church and see what we can do and see what we can take there, which was in one way fairly naive because I'd had no church background. I'd never had any church experience at all. But when I graduated, got married along the way, thankfully, and we ended up taking a church in London, which was, in a sense, the best of both worlds because it was a church situation, but it was also a church that had been begun by some people involved in L'Abri, so it was connected to L'Abri indirectly. Actually, the house that the church was in belonged to L'Abri. So L'Abri isn't a church, it was a Presbyterian church, so there's a clear organizational distinction between L'Abri and the church, but I was the pastor of the church and also working for L'Abri. And so I spent 7 or 8 years there as a pastor trying to put into practice some of the things that we valued in L'Abri, which is much harder than I thought it would be, and is still a major challenge for us. And then this is getting to the last leg, big long leg of my life story. Okay. We were offered the possibility of starting a branch of L'Abri in New England. This woman came to Dr. Schaeffer and said, I think you need a branch of L'Abri in New England and I'll buy you a house. Which she was true to her word, and we spent another year in Hampshire to see how we functioned in a residential setup, and then we came and started in 79, actually, 1979, a branch. She gave us a house, which is a big old mansion, which we got and turned into what we could run as a L'Abri. So I've been there since 1979, there in Massachusetts, just west of Boston, and started up from scratch. So each branch of L'Abri sort of finds its own way, takes its own shape, but has a continuity with the other branches. So that's been a great ride. It's been a good time for me, and I've never been that tempted to leave and do anything else. People ask, why don't you do graduate study or PhD, work at this and that and the other thing? And I've always felt I am free here at L'Abri to chase anything I think is important. I don't have to. I rejoice in being unaccredited. So people who come to study with us, we can take them anywhere where their mind is taking them. We don't have any fixed curriculum to push them through. I don't have any fixed curriculum to teach. If I lecture a series of lectures, we've got it on tape, I don't need to do it again. So I've experienced a tremendous freedom to chase ideas that I think are important from an environment where I'm getting people coming in all the time, which shows me, helps me see what is important, because I see what's hurting them, what's helping them, how their lives track on it. So I've never been seriously tempted to leave and to do something else, because it's been such a really exciting time for me because of that freedom.
So for people who are not really familiar with L'Abri, I mean, you go there and you stay and you study half the day and you work half the day, and so but the curriculum is really kind of loose to the person. It's more of a practical application, right? That you're almost like a doctor prescribing. Well, you need a little bit of this, you need a little bit of that.
And then checking next week to see what happened when you took this or didn't take that.
Yeah.
Because we don't. Yeah, when someone comes to L'Abri, they sit down with one of us and we ask, what's your story? Tell us your story. What's your life been like? What has been your Christian experience, if any? And then, okay, what do you hope to get from your time with us? And we link those ideas up and start them with a little bit. no more than a week's worth of work, almost always at the start. Sometimes they come with grand ideas. I want to spend 3 months on this and that. We say, no, we'll start you on that, but let's just take it easy first, because so many people come, and with all the other people there and the ideas that come up along the way, they take a 90-degree turn or whatever. I always think of a guy who came who wanted to study prayer. I say, okay, great, we'll set you up with about a week's worth of work on prayer, which I did. He comes back 3 days later and says, Dick, I'm not sure there's a God. And so I said, okay, that's fine. Just erase all that stuff I gave you before. Let's start over here. And I just love that freedom.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think when they have all sorts of spiritual problems, go to a seminary. Seminary is not equipped to shift like that.
Yeah.
You know, you have courses, you have a curriculum to go through, and I just love that fact of being unaccredited.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nobody telling us what to do, and so we can track down his sense of, well, where's he come unglued on belief in God,
Yeah.
and get back to prayer maybe at the end. But that's what I valued in it.
It makes me think of Schaeffer's True Spirituality, where he's talking about that it's really impossible for us to do this much prayer or this much Bible study and get this much spirituality.
Yeah.
But you have to do it non-mechanically. You have to really
That's right.
strive for something that's deeper and personal.
Exactly.
Because
right.
God is personal.
Yeah. And he hammered that all the time. It starts from the personhood of God, a personality of God. And that's why our personhood is so important. And that's why we have to treat people so importantly as persons rather than as numbers, problems, or sort of incarnations of some philosophy or something like that, or some whatever they may believe, but really as individuals. And so we start people off with a study program which is a mixture of recorded lectures and books. And each one has a tutor that meets with them at least once a week, if not more often, and go along and follow where they're going, and which is influenced by all the other people that are there too. And so the great thing with this is that we have terms that are about 3 months, but plenty of people don't have time to spend 3 months with us. They have time that it's only 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
So they come along in the middle of this, and we try and gear their study to what they have time to do. And so I've just enjoyed the freedom that gives us. And they study half the day, and then we put them to work the other half the day, doing stuff that needs to be done to keep the place going. In our branch, we have 7 wood stoves, so we spend a lot of time cutting and splitting wood. In the winter, we shovel snow. In the summer, we do a lot of gardening. And much of the year, we paint the house. And it's a big house with a lot of wood on the outside. So it's very practical. But that, too, is an important piece of it all. And to do things with your hands that are useful and that are helpful, that relate to what the basic things in life, like food, like a roof over your head, and so on.
And working alongside others.
Yeah,
what does
that's
that
right.
do for people? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. We always say the main reason we have you work isn't for the experience of working, it's because we need work to be done. We're not going to be inventing work for you to do because we think work is helpful. But the byproduct, it is helpful to you to do. It is a good thing to do. It shifts you out of some sort of head trip, and also you work together with others. And so often when we have a big project like building a dam or building another house, or cabin or something, which we're doing at the moment, that's a great thing for people to do, part of a bigger project, and they love doing it. And so that's an important piece of the picture, but a very much a real life part of it. And again, so much of what it is what means something to people is you never can predict. You have no idea what will be meaningful to them. And for someone, it's a certain series of lectures. For someone else, it's several years later, someone comes back and says, what really was helpful to me is watching you with your children. I said, what? What did you see? Or another guy comes to me and says, what really helpful to me is you told me I wasn't a Christian, which I did. But that shook him so much, started him back to square one, and no one had told him he wasn't a Christian. He should have been told he wasn't a Christian. He probably wasn't. But you just never know what it is that actually comes across and that makes a difference to people.
And that's really kind of connected, I think, to the kind of point of tension that they're dealing with as far as dealing with the real world, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it could be different for anybody depending on what kind of, what Schaeffer would say, false integration.
Yeah.
What they're putting in place of God.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is where we try and listen to see where someone is really coming from, and where I get the feeling, reading the book of Acts, that Paul asks two questions before he talks to anybody. He says, what do they know of God? What have they experienced of God and from God? And then what have they done with what they know of God? Where's the point of tension? Where's God putting pressure on someone's life? Which will be different from people in Lystra to people in Athens. And then as you read the book of Acts, from Felix to Festus or whatever. And he listens, and then he speaks to that. But it's totally person relative. The gospel isn't relative. The truth of the gospel is really absolutely true. But how we speak to any individual is relative to who they are as a person. And I think Dr. Schaeffer was a tremendous help in outlining that, so that we don't think of evangelism and apologetics as having a specific argument to lay on someone. Mm-hmm. And if there's any system, I think, behind Schaeffer's work, which he didn't like to use that word, his apologetic theory, method, or system, but if there is anything, it's flexibility.
Yeah.
It's moving on. It's being sensitive to the person and what they're dealing with. So that's been very hugely helpful. I mean, I experienced it firsthand from the other end, from him, when I wasn't a Christian. But it's also been hugely important to be able to treat people in that way and know this was the right way to treat people.
Yeah. Now, if we could backtrack just a little bit, what was Schaeffer and Edith like as mentors and teachers, and what kind of relevance do you think they have for today in the work that you're doing?
Well, hugely, we wouldn't be doing it at all had they not come along. I'm often amazed and grateful for the model of L'Abri, in the sense of the open door, people coming and being able to have them study and also work, but to be able to have conversation with them all the time, and an open door all the time. Mm-hmm. Of interaction. I didn't find that was much slower and more difficult to do as a pastor. If I met someone in the church and I really want them to, I'd like you to read this book and listen to these 8 lectures. People didn't have time to do that. Mm. No, say forget it. And yet, just by virtue of someone coming to L'Abri, they're with us for whatever the time, they have the time to do that. So the model is not something they were absolutely clear. We did not invent this. We did not scheme and say, what do we want to do? It just happened as they were a family with the door open. Mm. And God led them to it, not from a prepackaged plan, but from a just very practical, caring for people, figuring out how can we meet the needs of these people who are here and who have all these questions, that there's no prefab answer to them. They need time, they need to experience their own dignity. We need to really help. And what they did is, with God's guidance, is to construct a certain model of ministry that is really quite unique, I think. Mm-hmm. And I'm just hugely grateful for that. Now, personally, of course, I'm very grateful to having learned a huge amount from Dr. Schaeffer and ways of thinking, not just accumulated facts, but ways of thinking, ways of treating people. I think the most important thing for him really was his level of care for people. Not his ideas, but his real care. He was really present. We've all talked to people who, as we talk to them, we can see their mind is someplace else. Yeah. They're thinking about the stock market. They're talking to me, but they're thinking about the stock market, or thinking about the film they saw yesterday. And with Dr. Schaeffer, he was there, and he was present with you, and you knew he was taking you seriously, deeply seriously, probably more seriously than you took yourself. Mm. And that was really true. That was really true, and I knew him well enough to know that it was not a pose. So, but that was really, and he really suffered with people. He really cared for people being lost, for people suffering, and it was that shouldn't be that unusual, and it's not, I mean, lots of people do that, but this was somehow, in his sense, this was very, very powerfully true in his case, very deeply, seriously true in his case, which made a tremendous impression on me. For her, in many of the same ways, she was high energy, unbelievable energy.
Yeah.
Exhausted people trying to keep up with her, and so on. But not just energy, but caring for people. Huge amount of time in serving meals and giving people, meeting people's very physical needs, and all the while, not just with her hands moving fast in the kitchen, all the while talking to 2 or 3 people at once about their issues, and trying to get with their problems. And she was always going as a in some form of counsel or interaction with the people she was working with, and with tremendous wisdom. She didn't try to compete with her husband at all in terms of analysis of modern thought or something. She was very familiar with his ideas, and she could deal with them. But she was herself, and dealing very, very practically. I remember I've spent hours. This is quite a few years later, but I've spent several hours. Someone who'd just gotten a divorce and was going through from a minister in Christian work, who'd left her. And how was she? Well, praise the Lord, everything's going well. Praise the Lord. And I couldn't get through the praise the Lord exterior. This was her conference. Later that afternoon, she sat down with Mrs. Schaeffer. Mrs. Schaeffer, in the first 10 minutes, said, "Listen, I've listened to you. I want you to speak English to me. You're talking about praise the Lord. I don't understand what this means in your situation. I want you to speak real English and tell me where you are." And she dropped all the defenses that I hadn't been able to get through at all, and told her she's absolutely dying inside. And that's what that's the sort of thing I really respect in her. She could do it. She'd get away with it because people would trust that she did it because she cared, and she loved people. But very direct, very challenging because she knew what she knew, and loved people enough to dare to risk that. And I always think of that example because I felt so utterly impotent myself to get anywhere. I knew something of what the problem was, but couldn't get through myself. So I just think that the two of them had an amazing combination. Neither of them could have done anything like L'Abri without the other. People make much more of Dr. Schaeffer because of his publishing and his name and so on. He would be the first one to say, "I could never have done it without her. Never dreamt of doing it without her." And so her part of it was huge, I think, and in holding it together and keeping him going and doing all the things that were necessary, but only by living life at triple speed.
Well, I know in the midst of all that too, they model prayer for you.
Oh yes,
in a very, very deep way.
Absolutely.
We talked just a little bit about that earlier. That it was something that was a testimony to the people that were visiting. So it was not only this that they're going beyond their normal means to minister, but they're also just inhabiting this kind of prayer lifestyle.
That's right, and that was huge, I think, and that hit me the first time I went. The first week, I only could stay there. I could handle it for about 1 week before it was too much for me. Yeah. but the idea of what was happening there, they started at the beginning, cutting themselves off from any financial support from the mission board in the States, and then decided they would only pray for financial support, pray for money to come in, and never do any fundraising. And or a deputation or anything like this. That they would also never do sort of headhunting for people to do work, to be workers there, or recruiting for people to be workers there. They would pray for God to bring workers there. They also would not have 5-year or 10-year plans about how the work was going to develop in the future, but they would really depend on God to direct them at a time. And that was a two-sided thing, I think. They felt that this would help keep L'Abri honest before God, and it would also be an evidence to people who didn't believe, because they desperately thought that, not desperately, but just keenly thought that people who are not Christians need to see it lived out. If we talk about God being personal, God being powerful, they deserve to see in the life of Christians that God indeed is powerful, that God indeed does answer prayers, that you can live in dependence on him, rather than just hear us just say the words. And so that was very important for them, and I think all of us would, none of us at L'Abri now would want to reverse that. We've been going over ever since with the same principles. I don't think any of us would want to reverse it, even though it's not a good, not as if we've gotten rich at it, and we've gone very, very often with no salaries at all, and depending on the branch and the time, and yet it's been a play. It pushes us to dependence on prayer, and also I think those who come, and so there's nothing like not having what you need at a basic survival level to push you to prayer, to push you to really pray, and so we do, and so they did, and she was someone for whom prayer came very naturally. He less so. It was sometimes a battle. He prayed a great deal, but for her, you got a sense that she might pray for hours many days, and just that not being a special event, but that being just the way she was, and that was evident in the way things were. That was evident in the way things worked. But I think I've found it, and I think my wife and I and all of us in Massachusetts have found that to be a really helpful way, the way L'Abri works, which puts you where you need to pray, and you really need to pray, because your back is to the wall some of the time. I mean, we want the lights to go on when we flick the switch, rather than people turning the electricity off on us, because we haven't paid the bill. And sometimes we're right down. An interesting part of that is that I think God probably wants us to be often right down on almost nothing to keep us praying, because we've again and again come down to almost nothing, but never been in debt, never really gone into the red, which is amazing.
Truly.
But the fact that L'Abri exists at all is to me an absolute wonder. Why should we exist? Economic upturn, downturn, all over the place, recession. Somehow we're still going. It's just the grace of God in an amazing way. But prayer is central to that, and just really important. And then of course we pray also for the students who come, and to bring the students. That's another thing we pray for, and don't go recruiting students. And then we pray very much for God to bring the right people who really are able to gain from it and profit from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have one last question for you. As I kind of look from the outside at L'Abri and the people that are involved in doing the conferences, and there seems an ongoing continuance of the message of how Schaeffer understood things, and really that's kind of the historic Christian biblical position. There seems to be also advancements in his thought. In fact, I think hearing today, it seemed like you refined this your lecture on the image of God and the display within creation, and so if you could talk just a little bit about where you see the scholarship going internally. I think sometimes we don't really get a behind the scenes about what you are all doing in your studies and where you hope to see things go.
Yeah, that's harder to say in terms of grand directions, because I remember I asked Dr. Schaeffer very late in the day in his life when I was probably a few years before he died. Okay, here we are. What can you tell us of areas that you think are important for us to study? Where should we go? Where should we put our emphasis and so on? And he would tell me absolutely nothing. Really? He wouldn't tell me anything. He says, you've got to do it yourself. You've got to work it out yourself and take where God leads you. And I've always respected that. I was disappointed immediately, right then. But I've always respected a lot of wisdom behind that, because where you track is so important, and it's got to be you that really is feeling it's an important thing to do. So obviously postmodernism has come since he died. I mean, it was brewing when he was still living. A lot of us have struggled with postmodern issues, sort of heightened relativism. I don't believe, as some people will say, we're living in a postmodern world. I think we're still living in the crossfire between modernism and postmodernism. And so what we're hitting is a very confused thing with different messages going on in people's minds, maybe even in the same person. All sorts of mixtures of mind. For example, there's enormous authority of science. That's a very modernist part of the agenda. Yeah. So a lot of us have grappled with those issues. A bunch of us have turned, it's sort of been wanting to speak more to sort of what people see as a therapeutic revolution, lifting up of the psychological and the human sciences, and interacting with those. So that's another area. Some is like in the lecture I gave today on meaning. That's very much an issue that he was dealing with. We're trying to take it to where people are hurting today. And I've been just committed to not trying to redo his work, but to see where is this happening today. The family. My wife has done a huge amount of work on feminism, the family. She's writing a book now on what has happened with love-based marriage. And the chaos that's in and fragmentation today from a historical perspective. There are people who have done work in economics. One of my friends in England has worked a lot on community. I think what Francis Schaeffer introduced to the Christian world a whole perspective on it's good and okay to be involved in the academic world as a Christian, and you should do it with the lordship of Christ over all of life. You're not breaking from the Christian faith. You're taking the Christian faith where it belongs into the world in all sorts of areas. So many professors today that I meet who are Christians say they got permission to do what they did from Dr. Schaeffer. Yeah. That is a battle that in one way doesn't need to be fought anymore in the same way. Yeah. It's many Christian schools and colleges are conscious of worldviews and so on. We all need to do it much better. It's not we haven't arrived, but L'Abri isn't alone blowing down the horn on that issue. We do it, we still do it wherever we go, but it's happening in a lot of places. What I feel is one of the more unique things of L'Abri is community. There aren't that many people still in communities. Most of the communities have folded. There's a great hunger for community. So, for example, one of my friends in the English branch has done a lot of work on community. And how does this work? How does it function? How could it function? How should it function out in the world? And how should it work? So I think I don't see any one drift, but we're all doing specific work. Some people working in the sciences, some people working more in theology and hermeneutics, and just feeling our way along to see what is relevant, to see what is important. And to me, it's a great place to be because we have so many people coming from so many perspectives that we get to talk to them. We get to try and wrestle through where are they hurting, how are they hurting. So in a way, we can't afford to be real specialists because someone comes with the problem of evil and somebody else comes the next day with the problem of canonicity. How do we know that these books belong in the Bible, not others? Yeah. And say, somebody else comes along and why is the Bible the enemy of women? So, off we go.
And it just kind of forces you into a multidiscipline issue.
That's right. So we're all trying to keep up with some of these things, but that's, I think, the strength of L'Abri.